We think of art as representing the visible world pretty much as seen by human beings. I'm Marina Warner. I'm principally a writer. I've written quite a lot of books, both fiction and non-fiction, cultural history and criticism. But I'm also a teacher. Welcome to my exp. So from the first drawings on the cave walls, we see it as a way of encapsulating, crystallizing, making the experiences through our eyes, capturing them in a permanent form. But I was brought up a Catholic, and if you're brought up a Catholic, all you see in the images in your prayer books and on the walls of the churches and so forth, which I was entranced by when I was young, I was completely mesmerized, they are mostly images of things that you can't see. So they're mostly images of angels and heaven and visions of saints, what they saw, sort of ecstatic visions, and also, of course, events that have become now historical events, such as, or considered historical events, such as the crucifixion or the resurrection of Christ. But these things, the crucifixion may have happened, a terrible criminal way of killing people under the Roman Empire, but nevertheless, that it is painters have imagined and wrought into reality their imaginings for a kind of collective experience of what we feel is reality. You know, anybody in America, they have many visions of angels, and people always describe exactly how they appear to them. And of course, the description is exactly what they look like in paintings. So there you have a transposition into the world that is perceived as the empirical world, but isn't at all. And then that's just simply one aspect of the ways art is the discoverer of the invisible. And the other way is that it has become also more in modern times and contemporary times, the chronicler of the invisible states of the inner mind. So there's the second aspect of the invisible that has been made present and realized by art, and that is the state of the inner mind, what we see with our inner eyes, and in modernity and in contemporary life, the psychological states, dream states, hallucinations, nightmares. And they run from someone like Bosch through Goya, right up to the present day, and the inquiries of the surrealists, whose interest in art was really to depict what can't be seen, what is experiences of human consciousness, but actually lie beyond empirical testing. What art seems to me to deploy, and why I've written so much about it, is ideological. So art is the great carrier of meanings in the public sphere. Even private paintings, even the most personal landscape in watercolor, the way I look at art will carry underneath its apparent surface of simply pastoral prettiness or pastoral beauty, will carry some kind of social or political weight. It will carry that burden with it. I mean, this is a school of art criticism that's called cultural materialism, but for me it's also anthropological, because it's related to the way we look at another. If we go to a museum and we look at a vitrine of the works of art made by a certain people or tribe in the past, we tend to look at that work for its beauty, for its manifest aesthetic qualities, for its craftsmanship, its skill, and so forth, but also as evidence of what those people believed and thought and followed and aspired to, their model of the world, how they conceived of their gods, what properties their gods had. In my childhood, the way the images entranced me later revealed to me that they were actually carrying a very strong weight. Madonna's a child, the most beautiful paintings in the world, Botticelli, Raphael, and so forth. But I began to see that they had a design upon me to hold up to me an image of virginity and motherhood combined, an impossible amalgam, an image of perfect motherhood, of femininity, an image of docility, acquiescence, subordination to the idea of maternity, to the idea of the child, and so forth. And that, I think, runs through a great deal of image making, unbeknownst often to the artist. We, the artists, are often unwitting tools of prevailing ideology, and one has to live in constant vigilance against accepting the conventions and going with them. It is one of the tasks of art, I think, to try and see its own ideological ballast and try and upset it. I would say that the human species is pretty much hardwired to enjoy art. It's a sign of the human from the very beginning. It's a sign that differentiates us partly from animals. Though animals do make beautiful things, we're not certain that they make them in the interests of beauty or ornament. They do actually, so bowerbirds do. But on the whole, it's a mark of the human to respond to images too. If you think of a child's development, a child will be able to enjoy pictures and actually recognize pictures very, very quickly, long before they learn to read. And they will make, as Picasso pointed out, the most remarkable images themselves. What we can learn to look at is what the significance of art is. And we can also attempt to understand its power and to understand very difficult, packed concepts like beauty, which is so unexamined. I must stop and look at what I mean by beauty, because of course you also need to look at what you mean by ugliness. And these have often moral valences, so that ugliness is often used in art to denote evil. And that, of course, needs to be examined. So devils are characterized in pictures from the Middle Ages onwards as somehow deformed, and that needs to be thought through and challenged as well. We can learn to look at art, and it's a great pleasure to learn to look at art, and it's a collective process. One of the things that's happened in recent times, since I was a young woman first in London, is that contemporary art has become a social event. People like going together to art galleries. We're a making species, and the representations we make, whether they are of fantasies in the inner world or of the outer world, are a mark of our inner drives as people. And it's a solace and a source of survival and courage to make things. You know, one of the great psychoanalysts, D.W. Winnicott, he wrote a book called Playing and Reality. And he used art therapy to some extent, and other psychoanalysts followed him, like Marion Milner, in using art as part of a psychoanalytic inquiry, especially into children's states of mind. Winnicott stresses that playing is reality. To represent the world, to model reality through toys or masks or things that you make, is a way of actually developing self in relation to world. The idea of the world that you receive through the making of images or through looking at images that others have made helps you orient yourself and your place in the world. One of the paradoxes about the aesthetic experience, and this applies to written works as well, is that we take great pleasure in the unpleasant. So Aristotle pointed out at the very beginning of the Poetics that the human mind is made in such a way that things that would disgust, alarm and terrify us if we encountered them in real life can become objects of fascination and pleasure when seen in representations, or as for example, he was talking about tragedy, as in tragedy. But the examples he gave was looking at corpses and at vile insects. And this is something that I feel very strongly about. I feel that it's one of the capacities of art to represent terror and horror in ways that make us understand those states And while we appreciate and take some sort of aesthetic pleasure in the image, so if you think of Goya's horrors of war, the catastrophes of war, in which he's unsparing in his depiction of the massacres and atrocities that he had heard or perhaps even seen during the Spanish War in his lifetime. He also went further because there are lots of tropes of tortures which he probably got from memories of the Inquisition and earlier medieval images of hell. So it isn't only a realistic portrait of disasters he saw. It's a condensation of his rage and outrage against the cruelties and needless violence and endless violence and useless violence that he had experienced and his fellow Spaniards had experienced. And yet, these are very great works of art. And part of it is that we appreciate being in contact with a mind that has made us understand something that we would flinch from or turn away from and not wish to understand. And there are documents that are also warnings. And that takes us to perhaps one of the functions that perhaps is associated with pleasure. Certainly it's associated with appreciation. One of the functions of art, if you take an anthropological view as I do, is to try and contain threat. So it's possible that the cave paintings of animals were acts of propitiation against the danger that might come from the animals who were being slaughtered and used for human survival, whose skins were being used for clothing, who were being eaten, and so forth. So they were painted or drawn on the walls of caves to invoke them and placate them, pay honor to them and placate them. So that's one function. But in going back to the Goyas, the other function is let this not happen again, never again. There is a way in which, by freezing it into an artifact and condensing into it the passion that one feels against such things happening, an attempt is being made to avert it. The technical term is apotropaic. And so when you make an image of Medusa, if you're an ancient Greek or a neoclassical architect, and you make an image of Medusa and you place it over the entrance to a building, the mask bristling with snakes, tongue lolling, teeth bared, that horror head is actually placed there to avert dangers, to calm and still the possibility of further repeats of such terrors. The Greeks had a concept which was the high principle of art. Art should aim, they said, at something they called enargeia, which sounds a little bit like energy, but actually meant a kind of quality of living likeness. So they associated it with accurate representation so that something looked real. And their highest examples were a bunch of grapes that was painted on a wall, the birds mistaking it for a real bunch of grapes and coming to peck at it. This idea of this living energy, this quality of vibrant power coming out of a work of art, I think can now be seen as what advertisers are trying to tap. I think we are perfectly aware of it as a society now, a modern society, because advertising is still the largest source of revenue. Why? Because images, coupled of course with messages, but the messages when they flit past for us now on the web are not as important as the images. The images have a lingering power and it's subliminal. We don't even know that it has affected us. So it's connected to studies of hypnosis so the image is as it were emanating forms of current into our consciousness and imprinting us. And one of the reasons that we need to think about the power of art is this level of unconscious influence that images create. One of the things I've often been very, very puzzled by is how quick the zeitgeist tunes our eyes. How quickly, for example, the wrong cut of jeans is actually known to all young people. Now, you may think that that's a very far cry from fine art or from art at all. How do images work upon us? They work upon us as ideals, and they work upon us as value systems. They inculcate value systems, and they do it pretty much imperceptibly. We don't really know how we've been affected.